So any reflections or comments or takeaways or something you remember particularly from chapter 7 that we went through last week? Don't feel shy. Even if it was the slide that said grounding and just doing the Hare Krishna mantra, that's fine too. Whatever you remember. No one? Okay, I will assume that people would not like to share this time. We'll move on then. Summary study of chapter 8, Attaining the Supreme. So chapter 8 is one of the perhaps smaller chapters in the Gita. The smallest chapter is chapter 15 that only has 20 texts. So chapter 8 has 28 texts, and so it's one of the smaller ones. I would say maybe it's the second or third smallest chapter. At the same time, it does have some very powerful messages, important messages that are related to how do you attain the Supreme. So I'll walk us through, here it presents the 6 chapters, the middle 6 chapters of the Gita. So the Gita could be roughly divided into section 1, the first 6 chapters, section 2, the second 6 chapters, and section 3 is the last 6 chapters. Section 1, more or less, even though it has a variety of different kinds of paths and yogas presented, more or less talks about karma yoga, or the yoga of active work dedicated to the Supreme. The last 6 chapters, again, has a bunch of other topics, but more or less the theme through the last 6 chapters is Jnana Yoga, or the yoga of how do you use your intelligence to study philosophical concepts and then enter into meditation based on those philosophical concepts. So that's Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. The middle 6 chapters, these chapters, chapters 7 through 12, are like jewels, the most important part of the Bhagavad Gita. And they focus on the message of Bhakti Yoga. There's many other messages, but the key theme.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I rang, but nothing was.
The key theme through the middle 6 chapters is bhakti. Just like you have a front yard and you have a backyard, and the most precious part of the property is the home, and that's in the middle of the property, right? Or you will keep the most treasured item in a box that's sandwiched like a jewel. Similarly, or you might have a sandwich. You have a slice of bread, and the top slice of bread, and the bottom slice of bread, and the middle part of the sandwich is where the main tasty stuff is, right? So similarly, the Bhagavad Gita has within the middle 6 chapters the most tasty stuff, if you will. So chapter 7 was Krishna and his energies. Chapter 8 talks about how to reach the Supreme, how to connect with the Supreme, how to attain the Supreme. Chapter 9 is primarily bhakti. It's called Most Confidential Knowledge is the name of the chapter. Chapter 10 is Opulences of the Absolute. Chapter 11 speaks of the universal form of the Supreme. And then chapter 12 is titled Bhakti Yoga also. And it primarily talks about what are the qualities that attract God, which is a very important topic, nice topic. What are the qualities that attract God? So that's up chapter 12. That's coming up in a few weeks here. So at the end of chapter 7, Krishna introduces several terms that Arjuna inquires about. And I've put these Sanskrit terms here: Brahma, Adhyatmam, Karma, Adibhutam, Adidevam, and Adiyagyam. The translations are: Brahma means what is spiritual. Adhyatmam means what is the self. Who am I? Karma, karma. Karma means activity, a fruit of activity, activity that produces a result. I do something, I get something back. Adibhutam is matter, everything related to matter. Adidevam refers to controllers of matter. And also it can be called providence. And Adi Yagya is the person who is the beneficiary of all sacrifice. That's Adi Yagya. Another name for that is the super soul within the heart. So the last verse in chapter 7 is shown here on the bottom. Those in full consciousness of me, Krishna says, who know me to be the governing principle of the material manifestation, the Lord of the demigods, and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me at the time of death. So Krishna says he calls himself the governing principle of the material manifestation. That's actually Adibhutam. He calls himself the Lord of the demigods, meaning those who control matter, those who are cosmic controllers that are in charge of the light and the wind and the water and other things of the universe. That's Adidevam. Yeah. And all methods of sacrifice, the Lord of all methods of sacrifice, that's Adi Yagya. So if one understands, one's fully conscious of Krishna as having all of these features, then at the time of death, one can understand and know Krishna. So now Arjuna hears this, and in the beginning of chapter 8, he asks these questions. Like, you've spoken about Brahma and Adhyatmam and all these technical terms. Can you explain them to me? So you see in the verse here, the word Kim is used repeatedly. Kim. Kim means what? What is Brahma? Kim. What is Adhyatmam? Kim. What is karma? What is Adibhutam? Kim. Proktam means what? What is Adibhutam called? What is Adidevam, etc. So the word Kim is repeated here, which means simply what? Kim is also a name that some people have in the West. So the question of Brahma, what is Brahma, is answered in text 3. What is Adhyatma is answered in text 3. Karma is answered in text 3. What is Adibhuta, Adideva, and Adiyagya? All of them are answered in text 4. And then from text 5 to text 28 answers this one question of Arjuna. That's a very powerful question. He says, how do we know you at the time of death? How can we remember you at the time of death? Because it's considered that life is a preparation and death is an examination. Because what we think of at the time of death leads the soul to the next life. And Krishna explains that in this chapter. Some people think that spiritual life is meant for when you grow old. I remember when I was a much younger person, I was maybe 25, and I had just gotten involved with the Bhagavad Gita and spiritual life, and I had some acquaintances in the community who were much older, like 50, 55-year-old people. And they saw me kind of like having a book table and distributing the Bhagavad Gita. And they asked me, and they saw me doing this, and they said, "You're into this?" And I said, "Yeah, I actually very much like it. It's very meaningful for me. And this person who was like 50, 55 years old looked at me and was like, you're too young for this. This is not supposed to be done at this age. Only when you grow really old is when you're supposed to do it. And I was thinking in my mind, but you're like 50, 55. Who knows how long more you've got, you know? Life is unpredictable. So we think that we can put our minds to something in very short period and figure it out. But Krishna doesn't suggest that. The Gita doesn't suggest that, because yoga and the practice of actually remembering something spiritual takes practice. It's something that happens over a long period of time. Even the Yoga Sutras, you may have heard of this, the book called the Yoga Sutras. So in the Yoga Sutras, it explains how the various yoga postures you do and how you can do pranayam, control over breath, and so forth. In the Yoga Sutras as well, Patanjali, who's the sage of the Yoga Sutras, he explains that one should practice, but practice over a long period of time. So just thinking that at the time of death, things are going to magically happen for me, like my consciousness is going to be fixed in something spiritual, so my next destination will be absolutely fine, is perhaps a little too optimistic. So one needs to practice. Life is a practice, so life is a preparation, and then death is the examination. What is karma? Krishna answers that question. He makes a really terse statement. And here's his terse statement. He says, action pertaining to the development of material bodies of living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. So any action that carves and designs the next body for us is called karma. If we do an action, whether it be speaking something with our hands, something with our legs, even if we're even thinking something, the thoughts that we have, the speech that we engage in, the actions that we do, all of that put together at a moment-to-moment basis is crafting, slowly but surely, it's crafting the next body for us. Said another way, this is another statement explaining this. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world, and that is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. So we see so many different people have different kinds of bodies, and it's all driven by that force of karma. I have a bald head. As much as I may want to have hair, I don't have a choice. It's the force of my karma. I have weak knees, and other people have awesome knees. I actually watch people jogging on the street and go, oh my goodness, like, how do you do that? Because they're jogging on concrete, and they can do that because their knees are not weak like mine. But I seem to have weak knees. I went to the orthopedic surgeon. They took some x-rays, they saw my knees and said, dude, you just have weak knees, nothing much you can do about it. Just my karma, right? So he said, the only exercises you can do, because I told him I play with my boys basketball, and after playing 1.5 hours of basketball and pushing it, my knees were shot for the next 4 days. And he said, yeah, well, you just got to do exercises that match the body, the capability of a body. Like you can only swim, bike, and walk. That's the only exercise I can do. And if I do any other, like if I do basketball, if I play tennis, whatever else I do, which I really, really enjoy, these racket sports or basketball, I can't handle it. My body whines and complains the next day. So what is that? That's just the consequence of previous actions that have made me get the particular body I have today that's causing me some difficulty. Right? So as the actions that we do today is now then crafting the next body. And that's what Krishna explains as karma. So, like I was saying earlier, these Arjuna asked these various technical questions. So Krishna explains Adhyatma means yourself. It's your eternal nature. Adi Bhutam means it's the material manifestation that's all around us. Adi Deva means the universal form, or also known as AKA, but also known as providence. When we say, it's providential, I met someone. Yesterday, we were in a kirtan, which was really fantastic kirtan. And it was supposed to be for 2 hours. This lead singer, who has come from Mauritius, so like really far, he's one of the world's best kirtaniya. And we were in the kirtan with him. It was just phenomenal. He had a spiritual power in that kirtan that, got everybody dancing for like an hour. What was really mystical was at the end, he was able to stop the kirtan without even looking at his watch. And he ended right on dot. It was supposed to be 2 hours. He was totally absorbed in the kirtan, but he knew exactly when to stop the kirtan. And I was shocked. I went up and asked him, how did you know that 2 hours was up? And he just humbly said, I don't know, Krishna. So this is providence, when you have providential forces helping you in whatever life, we might call it serendipitous experiences. That's Adi Devam, or this force of providence. And then the last technical term here is Adi Yagya, which Krishna explains as Adi Yagya means the God that's in your heart, or the super soul that's in your heart. So anything that we do as a sacrifice, as an austerity, we go out of our way to maybe help someone, or we go out of our way to maybe fast or do something like that, that's super soul in the heart. All right, so the next section, Krishna explains the answer of how can we know. Arjuna asks, how can I know you at the time of death? So Krishna says, for one who at the time of death, end of his life, quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this, there's no doubt. So this is a faith building text where Krishna is saying the word samshaya means doubt. He said there's no doubt that if at the end of one's life, your mind is fully focused on the Supreme, then you attain the nature of the Supreme. What is that nature? What does that look like? What's the nature of Krishna? So there's 4 or 3 basic qualities that Krishna's nature. The first one is eternality, Sat. The second one is Chit, or knowledge. Krishna is full of knowledge. Krishna is the fountainhead of all knowledge. And then the third one is Ananda. Ananda means happiness or bliss or joy or just deep satisfaction. Vigraha, spiritual form. So Krishna says we start to gain these qualities. If we remember him at the time of death, we then embody these qualities as well. That we are no longer in a temporary engagement. We're not in a material body. We have full realization of who we are and what the cosmos is all about. And we are actually genuinely happy, not superficially, not temporarily, but genuinely from the heart happy. We actually attain that nature. This is attaining the Supreme, the title of the chapter. So Arjuna asks, Arjuna's thinking, what if someone remembers something else at the time of death? So then Krishna says in text 6, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So if someone is thinking of sleeping a lot, for example, Prabhupada will give the example. If someone thinks about sleeping a lot, or they generally in their life, their consciousness is absorbed in sleeping, for them that's really, really important. Then at the time of death, the soul will be carried to a body that will facilitate sleeping, such as a polar bear or some kind of bear that hibernates half the year. If the state of one's mind and consciousness is that they really like power and control, then the soul will transfer to a body where they can have and exercise power and control. Now, this principle of whatever state of one, a state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. This principle applies not only between the transition of this body to our next life, but it's also applicable within this life. For example, I didn't grow up here in the United States, and some of you also may have not. And then you thought about moving to the United States. So that's where your consciousness, where my consciousness was, is to move to the United States. And then guess what? Here I am, 25 years later, citizen of the country, right? So it could happen within the same day. My mind and my consciousness is thinking about being at the gym. And then if my karma allows, I will be at the gym, like that. So this consciousness drives our activity and it determines the place that we ultimately find ourselves in. So these are various books that explain this concept of reincarnation and what kind of body one gets. On the left is a book called Coming Back. There's a reincarnation controversy, demystifying reincarnations. These are wonderful, intellectually stimulating books if you wish to learn more about what drives reincarnation. Now, there was a professor by the name of Dr. Ian Stevenson. He's no longer, he passed away. He was from the University of Virginia. And he studied like 3,000 cases of children who remembered past lives. And fascinating stories, where you will see, because of the consciousness that they carried at the time of death, they have now taken on childlike bodies and they remember their previous life by some gift. And that consciousness is carried over to this life. If you like offline, I can share with you some videos around this, some articles, etc., that make you really think about your own previous life. It challenges. It's a little jarring kind of information because it's, wow, if that's really real, what kind of journey am I on? If I've had previous lives, and what's next life going to be like? So it's provocative thought process for sure. So he's done. Dr. Ian Stevenson's done a bunch. There's another doctor called Dr. Brian Weiss. I don't know if some of you read some of his books, but he's written books on hypnotic regression. And I remember when I was like 15, 16 years old, I read a number of his books, like Many Lives, Many Masters, and so forth, where this concept of reincarnation is presented. And what Dr. Weiss talks about is how he heals people from trauma through past life regression. So he will, I remember this vividly. There was one person who was really fearful of water. They had this just strong fear of water. And through hypnotic regression, he took this person back to the 1500s, apparently, where that person remembered that they were in Spain, they were Spanish, and in Spain they were drowned in water. And so as soon as they remembered that through that hypnotic regression, when they came back to external consciousness after that event and working with Dr. Weiss, their trauma and fear of water was dissolved. It wasn't a problem anymore. Fascinating stuff. So anyway, the point being is that the state of consciousness at the time of death forces or takes the soul to the next situation. Again, the whole point that Krishna is trying to explain this so that the soul can now transition to the most favorable place, which is the spiritual home. So if you saw in the WhatsApp text, I had put something about the home. Where's our real home? And towards the end of the chapter, chapter 8, Krishna's encouraging Arjuna, head towards that, make a journey towards going to your true home, the spiritual world. This message comes later in the 15th chapter of the Gita, where it is said that the air, just as air carries fragrance from one place to the other, so does soul carry the mind and the senses with it when it leaves an old body and enters a new one. So we lose our physical body, but the mind and the impressions in the mind carry on to the next birth. Just that's why when you have two kids in the same family, they can act completely differently. They're in the same environment, same parents, same practically everything except maybe the time of birth. But two kids who are so different, psychologically so different. I mean, I have two boys, and my two boys are, poles apart in terms of personality. How is that? And the answer is given here is that the soul, while the soul moves to the next body, it carries with it the mind and the senses. Not the bodily senses, but more the subtle senses. And so the personality and the psychological makeup that somebody has is already pretty much inbuilt in the child as soon as they're born.
Hey, Yamuna, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So if we are doing all this chanting and going through the facts of practicing all this religion, now that we know this fact of at the end of our life, the very last day, very last hour, very last minute, all we have to do is think of Krishna, then what's the sense in doing all this hard work before we pass away?
If the state of our consciousness, by the way, that good question, Nilesh. I tried to address it earlier. I'll say it differently now. The state of our consciousness at the time of death is not a function of us just willing at the time of death, that particular second, yeah, I'm just going to think of Krishna and it's going to happen. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way because we are creatures of habit. And what we've been habitual to is what our consciousness will be filled with at the time of death. If we're habituated thinking about money and taking care of our family, guess what? At the end of life, when our cognizance is reduced drastically and we don't really have good sense of where we are and what we're doing, and our body is in great pain and we're just about to leave our body, you think we're going to think about Krishna? Or we're going to think about everything we're so habituated thinking about all of this time?
Well, I don't know. When I get there, I'll let you know, but thanks for the answer.
What do you think? Yeah. You get the point, right? So it's you got to practice at something.
I got you. Thank you.
Yeah. So just like with clothes, the kind of clothes you get is dependent on the ones you like and the budget you have, correct? Similarly, the body that we get is based on the desire that we have, the desires that are carried in the mind, and the karma that allows for us to have that particular body. So just wanting a more beautiful body in our next birth, a more healthier body, perhaps a male or female body, whatever we're particularly attached to. Maybe we want a cosmic controller body like a demigod. You know, we might have that kind of desire, but it's really dependent on not just our desire, but our karma as well. Erica, I noted that you said I'd love to read more about this kind of stuff. Feel free to maybe text me offline, and I'll share with you some resources. It's really cool stuff. All right, so how to make sure that one remembers you only at the time of death? So Krishna says, to answer your question, Nilesh, he says it right here. You got to practice remembering me throughout your life while doing one's duties. He's telling Arjuna to fight, which is Arjuna's duty. It's not our duty, but we might tend to fight. It depends on how we live our life. But the point being, you could take the fight here means to do one's duty. Arjuna's duty was to fight at that point in time. Our duty may be so many other things, because we have a certain phase of life with him in, certain family duties, social duties, community duties, self duties. We have duties to ourselves, like self-care and spiritual growth and so forth. So Krishna says, think of me, Mamanusmara, think of me and do your duties. So that's why it's the beginning part of one's day is intended to be a spiritual part of one's day, because that spiritual part will then infuse the rest of our life, or the rest of the day, with clear thought process, with devotional energy, and we'll be able to engage with the world in a much more wholesome way. So if we do spiritual practices, the best time to do it is in the morning, and the best time in the morning is an hour and a half before sunrise. Not to scare any of you, but that's the best part. So Arjuna may say, well, it's easy to think of you, it's easy to fight, but it's hard to do both of them at the same time. How do you fight and also think of you? So Krishna says in text 8, abhyasa. This is the key word. Abhyasa means practice. This word, abhyasa, also shows up in the Yoga Sutras. It's an extremely important word. Spiritual life is not just you think about it and it happens. Spiritual life is about practice, and consciousness. Spiritual consciousness is about practice. I know some of you are part of my wife's empathic communication group, and we can learn the theory of empathic communication all day long, but if we don't practice it, we're not going anywhere, isn't it? And that's for like a mundane, not mundane, but it's more like for a relationship skill within this world. What to speak of trying to transition to a spiritual dimension in our life, that requires practice too. And so Krishna says, it requires practice, Partha. Partha is another name for Arjuna. So practice to constantly meditate upon me. And then he says, with determination and exclusivity. The Sanskrit is chetasa na anyagamina, that with your heart is so determined and it's exclusively trying to think of Krishna while doing your duties. So how do we remember Krishna? So in text 9, Krishna explains 9 ways of remembering him: as the great philosopher, as the oldest person, Puranam, Anushasitaram, as the smaller than the smallest, larger than the largest, the maintainer of all, the inconceivable form, the person who is luminous like the sun and who's transcendental beyond darkness. So anyway, he provides 9 ways that we can remember him, but there are many other ways we can remember him. And then from text 10 to text 13, Krishna presents another way of remembering him, which is through the process of what's known as Shat Chakra Yoga. And Krishna recommends to focus on this mantra, on this bija mantra, which is a seed mantra, and it's a very small or short or accessible mantra called Om. So we can just practice that really quickly now ourselves. And we'll learn more about the Shat Chakra Yoga after a quick break here. Let's pause for a little bit, see if there are any comments or questions at this point.
I'll just like to add something.
Yeah.
When you say to practice, and then things will come instantaneously. I have an analogy about driving. When we're driving, sometimes we get from point A to point B kind of like unconsciously because we've done it so many times,
Yeah.
and it just happens.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like with this is like the more we do it, we're literally just thinking about praying or connection with God constantly, because if that's what you've practiced, that is what you'll be thinking.
Yes. Are you familiar with this progression of, when we start anything, it starts with unconscious incompetence. We're unconscious and we're incompetent. And then we get some knowledge. Oh, I'd like to practice, like just empathic communication. I like to practice that. Now we're conscious incompetence. So we transition from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, where we're just beginning to get, practice going. And then we move from unconscious competence, is a conscious incompetence, to conscious competence. So now we're getting good at it, but we're also still trying to mindfully practice it. And then from conscious competence, we transition to the last and final stage known as unconscious competence. We're unconsciously very competent. And then your example of driving is perfect. It's right on the mark. We start off, with unconscious incompetence, and we end up being conscious, unconscious competence. Like that. The thing with spirituality, though, is that we never become really unconscious about it. But yes, the practice becomes just more, it's me, it's just part of me. We're still conscious, but we're unconsciously conscious, if that makes sense. Any other comments or thoughts?
Yeah, but I have a question.
Yeah.
So, our action in this life, can those actions adjust our kind of karmic account in this life?
Yes.
Our spiritual practice and things like this, yeah?
Absolutely, to some degree, Daniel. So, for example, as much as the activity I do today, all of the activities I do to uplift my karma or to try to change my karma, it can to some degree, but it cannot. There's certain limitations. For example, I can't change the body I have. I just have the body I have. I'm stuck with it for this life. That level of karma I can't change. But what I can, let's say I might be going through legal issues. That's a consequence of karma. I'm fighting in courts all day long, spending money up the wazoo because it's legal world. Now by engaging in bhakti, actually, engaging in bhakti yoga, the Sanskrit is karmani nirdhati kintucha bhakti bhajam, which means that bhakti bhajam, when you engage in bhakti, karmani nirdhati, your karma is burned to ashes. Your good karma, your bad karma, all that's burned to ashes. So your, legal problem. That's one of the, when you just start practicing bhakti and you do it sincerely and you're doing it like with, making it one's goal of life, then the two features There are two benefits that immediately come when we practice what's called pure bhakti. When we're just starting off, there's Shubhada and Kleshagni. Shubhada means you start to gain qualities like tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, etc. On the flip side, Klesha Agni, the miseries of your life subside significantly. Legal problems, family problems, relational issues, mental health issues, etc., etc. All of that subsides for one who's taken up pure devotional service seriously.
Hmm.
But you can't change your body. There's certain limitations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comment or question before we move on?
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, true. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Can you hear me? Because I have the Bluetooth on my speaker. Do I sound clear? If not, I can put my headphones back on.
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay. So I get the concept of karma. The only thing that I battle with, and I was hesitating to ask the question, but I'll ask since it was on my mind, it was distracting me. I think about like the ills that happen to like little children. You know, you hear things about like little children getting raped or things that happen unjustly to innocent people and things like that. And so that's where I kind of struggle with the whole karma thing, because I'm like, man, you know, that was a good person. Why did that happen to them? So yeah, so my question is, you know, do you have anything to maybe shed some light on that? Like children or innocent people or good people. Sometimes it seems like bad people win more than good people. I know that's not the case. I'm saying sometimes it seems like that.
Yeah, no, true. Thanks for bringing that up. This is a very important question. This is a question that we all grapple with. Why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? A flip, right? This is a problem that this is a deeply philosophical question that many traditions either struggle with or really, you know, find it tough to address. I'll share a few thoughts, and I will say that it really, really requires it really, really requires for us to step back and ask the deeper questions first. When we make the statement that bad things happen to good people, we will be there's some very strong presumptions being made. A, we're making a judgment about a person, saying they're good. B, we're making a judgment about a situation, saying it's bad. And we have to really have to step back. And it's not easy. I'm right there with you, man. This is something I've contemplated and you know, considered very deeply for myself, because like you, when I see, you know, young children being killed or raped, as you said, or, you know, when you read stories of the Holocaust, right? Or whatever. I mean, there's so many wonderful, crazy stories of injustice and pain and struggle that people go through. And you wonder why. Like, you know, mass murders and school shootings, and I mean, the list is endless. The list is endless. Whether you are in Japan or you're all the way here in Hawaii, I mean, whatever part of the world you're in, there's injustices and pain and struggles that we see people going through. When I went through my chaplaincy training, I had to write a paper on the theology of suffering. And maybe you can ping me through after this and I can share with you that paper, because we sort of walk through this kind of understanding that I'm trying to express now in words.
Yeah, sure. We can circle back to this question, and I would love to read that article. Sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
But let me just say a few things. Number one is that when we see suffering of others, it is not helpful to go to the philosophy and say it's their karma. Don't go there. Please don't go there. That's not helpful for us or for them. Rather, for the gentle soul that's trying to walk the spiritual path, as soon as we see suffering of another, the question to ask ourselves is, how can we be of service? How can we serve? How can I help this situation? And it might not be an immediate, let me send some money or send some food or whatever. It might be something more long term, where it's saying how I can help is through character building, through spiritual education, to uplift the consciousness of people or society in general, so that these things happen less, where people hurt each other. But even if people are not hurting each other, we have things like tornadoes and floods and earthquakes. 40,000 people or more died in Turkey. How many children? Turkey and Syria with the recent earthquakes. Nobody did anything to anyone. It was simply an act of nature, right? So this mindset of humble service is critical. And secondly, the judgment of a good person or judgment of a bad situation may not be totally accurate, because when we step back, we don't know the life of an individual, what they did in their previous lives. We don't know. We just have no idea. We don't have vision into that. We have a very narrow vision of their current life and their current situation. And I'll say something else. A bad situation for a good person may be actually a very beneficial situation, because it helps that person grow and come closer to spiritual understanding. It helps that person to finally maybe take shelter of deeper truths of life, because maybe suffering, one of the reasons of suffering is to help that tendency that we have, that tendency to seek the supreme. Otherwise, if things were all hunky-dory, why do I need God? That's fine. So what may be considered a bad situation may actually be a spiritually encouraging situation. It may be, it may not be, but it may be. So I would just be careful to make the judgment that bad things are happening to good people or good things are happening to bad people, and rather think and consider, how can I serve the good people, the bad people, in the good situations or bad situations? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense.
Yeah, we can talk more about this later. All right, so I think Ukti, you had one more comment before we move on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. My understanding of how, when you said, why are two children so different in the same household, same parents, same environment?
Yeah.
We carry certain imprints with us. Our soul carries certain imprints. And from my understanding, could the imprints, another name for imprints could be sanskaras?
Absolutely.
Have you
Yes.
ever heard that? And I feel like, yes, when we die, we take those with us, as we take our karmic accounts for our soul with us too. So as like we reincarnate and you wonder why these things are happening, it's not that it happens out of chance. There truly is a path why things are happening. And I feel like we do have some sense of control, in the sense that bhakti, the connection with God, fulfilling our lives with God, can possibly change the direction of our destiny in our future lives, our soul in our future lives.
Well said. Samskars is certainly one word. Another word is vasanas. Have you heard of that word? Those are subtle impressions, some of which we may be aware of and some of which we may not be aware of. And those vasanas, those subconscious impressions, drive our life. We may not know it. And then we see the surface level behavior of people and we get caught up in that. But really what's driving us and others are subconscious, maybe we're unconscious of these driving forces called vasanas or samskars.
And I do think that once you find spirituality, you're into spirituality, you can recognize some of those things and you have the ability to change them
Yes.
through practice.
Yes. Great. Let's move on. All right. Shat Chakra Yoga. Krishna explains another way to remember him through the chanting of the mantra Om, like we just did prior to the break. And these are the 6 chakras of our body. And the names are given here. The bottommost chakra is the Muladhara chakra. Then the Swadhisthana chakra, the Manipuraka chakra, the Anahata chakra, the Vishuddha chakra, Agya chakra, and the final chakra is called the Brahmarandra chakra. A yogi, a advanced yogi, who's practicing the Dhyana yoga process or the Shat Chakra yoga process, they are carrying the life airs, the focus of our life airs, which is at the bottom here. And then through the process of meditation and chanting, the yogi is carrying the life airs to higher and higher points of their body, all the way up to the Brahmarandra, to the top of the head. And then the yogi gives up their life with their life airs, their spiritual energy at the top of the head, popping out of the head. It actually pops out of the head and enters into the next destination, typically to a more spiritual place. So the Shat Chakra Yoga's process is very briefly explained by Krishna in texts 10 to 13. Arjuna may ask implicitly, that's a very technical, is there something simpler? And so in text 14, Krishna says, yes, by this Ananya Cheta. Anya means other, Ananya means no other. Having no other desire, where the heart is constantly trying to serve Krishna. This is a bhakti message, pure devotional service, that exclusive. You want to serve Krishna exclusively. So he says, yes, by remembering me exclusively by pure bhakti, I am very easy to obtain. So let's keep in mind, again, the theme of this chapter, the title of the chapter is Attaining the Supreme. And the theme that I present in the WhatsApp group is, what's real home for us? What is home for us? And the 8th chapter of the Gita is encouraging us to find home in Krishna's abode. And Krishna says, I can be that, I am home for you. And I can be very easy to obtain by exclusive pure bhakti. So this is a quote, just as living life is an art, and we can learn that art from the Gita, similarly dying is also an art, and we can learn that too from the Gita. And one who learns this art of dying becomes fearless. Because our greatest fear is fear of death. Fear of losing things means the death of several things in our life, micro deaths you could say. And then our greatest fear is the fear of our physical death. And if we've understood how to manage that, then one becomes fearless. So Arjuna asked, or implicitly asked, do people who attain you take birth again in this world? Because Krishna says, those who are focused on me easily attain me. And Krishna in the next verse says, they never come back. Napnuvanti. Punarjanma na. They never take birth again in this place. And Krishna explains the place that we're living in is Dukhalayam and Ashashvatam, the two Sanskrit words. Dukhalayam means a place of sadness, Ashashvata means temporary. So it's a place of sadness due to its insubstantiality or its temporary nature. The world we live in is just, it is what it is. It's a place of sadness. And why is this a place of sadness? Because nothing is eternal. Nothing is consistent or constant, or the only thing that's constant, as people say, is change, right? So very important. 2 times in the Gita, Krishna makes the statement. He's like put a label on the world that we live in, that it's got these 2 features. It's a place of misery and it's temporary. Again, in the 9th chapter, he says it's a place of misery and it's temporary. So if the creator says, just like the makers of a pack of cigarettes say, smoking is injurious to health, they put it there, yeah, people smoke. Similarly, in this verse and the next chapter as well, Krishna is saying the place that we live in is not a place to try to squeeze out happiness. It's not. We try to squeeze out happiness in this material world, and it doesn't have the quality of happiness that deeply satisfies us. Why? Because it's insubstantial and it's a place of sadness. It doesn't matter who you talk to. You scratch the surface a little bit and you'll find all kinds of pain and anxiety and sadness. Doesn't matter who you talk to. My mother-in-law taught me a Hindi phrase. I'm not so good in Hindi, but she speaks Hindi. So she said, "Jisse na pucho wohi sukhi," which means the only person who is happy is the person you've not asked how their life is going. All right, so then Krishna continues on explaining the material world from text 17 to 19, and then verses the spiritual world, which is intended to be explained as our true home in text 20 to 22. The material world and the spiritual world. So Krishna is in text 16, he explains that there are several layers of planetary systems in the material world, and in all of these layers, so it's on the left, it says 14 lokas. Lokas means planets or planetary systems. There's 14 planetary systems, and in all of these 14 planetary systems are places of suffering, and everything comes to an end at some point. And let me just say, and the topmost planetary system is known as the place of Brahmaloka, or the place where Lord Brahma resides, who is considered to be the secondary creator after Krishna. Krishna gives him the service to create, and Brahma is the creator. So in this topmost planet, relative to our Earth planet, how long is Brahma's day? It's equal to, so let me just give you some sense of time here. From the Vedic perspective, time works in a cycle. We are currently in the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga means the Iron Age. This Dwapar Yuga is the Copper Age. Treta Yuga is the Silver Age, and Satya Yuga is the Golden Age. So Golden Age, Silver Age, Copper Age, Iron Age. We're in the Iron Age, where strife and quarrel are replete and abundant. Needless to say, the Golden Age is where there's just much nicer times. So on the right, you see the Kali Yuga lasts for 432,000 years. We're about 5,000 years into Kali Yuga. We've got about 427,000 years of progressive degradation. Not fun. Now, each of these ages are related with the Kali Yuga as 2x, 3x, and 4x. Your total of one full cycle of these ages is 4,320,000 years. And then you multiply that by 1,000, it equals to 4,320,000 years. Okay? that 4,320,000 years is one day of Brahma. That's how the time scale works. And then his night is also another 4,320,000 years. And then Brahma lives for 100 years, and it equals to 311 trillion 40 billion of our years. And Brahma and universes are popping in and out of existence with the breath of Vishnu. So even though his lifetime seems really fantastic to us, from the viewpoint of eternity, it's as brief as a lightning flash. This is knock your socks off statistics. I want to share a quote from a person named Carl Sagan. Some of you may know him. Can you see this quote? So he says, from the Hindu tradition is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite number of births and deaths and rebirths. It's the only tradition in which the time scale correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, which is 8.64 billion years long. Remember I was talking about the day and night of Brahma is 8.64 billion? So longer than that, longer than the age of the earth or the sun, and about half the time since the Big Bang. I thought it was pretty interesting. Carl Sagan is considered to be an agnostic, not really with one spiritual tradition or the other, but he has a great series on this idea of the series of videos on cosmos. Good stuff. Anyway, so Brahma's life is 311 trillion 40 billion years, and it's as brief as a lightning flash when you consider from the viewpoint of eternity. This is really humbling. Our lifespans are really meager, and our existence is insignificant. So Krishna then says, yet there's another unmanifest nature which is eternal and transcendental to this manifest and unmanifest matter. It is supreme and it's never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as is. So Krishna is now talking about his abode, the spiritual world. That place is home for us. It's where we can kick back and just relax, and it's where we're meant to be. It's the most comfortable, natural place for the living entities. This is a message from the Bhagavatam. The picture on the left is intended to show, just the comfort of being in home. So the Bhagavatam says, those who are less intelligent do not know that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Supreme Person lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusioned and search after other homes. Home is where the heart is. Home is where we want to feel comfortable, unjudged, loved, and where we can offer some service to others as well. That's home for us. It's where we can be in our pajamas, be completely bare about, in the open of who we really are. And Krishna is inviting us to that abode because that's, from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, that's true home for the living entity. So how to go to that spiritual abode? So Krishna says, only by unalloyed and undeviating devotion, or ananya bhakti. So Krishna then makes a differentiation between the practice of bhakti, or the practice of the more mechanical yoga process. So he says the time in which the mechanical yogi leaves the body plays a very critical role. So if you leave the body as a yogi when the sun is passing through the northern hemisphere, then you don't return. If you leave the body when the sun is passing through the southern hemisphere, then one returns. So this is a story from the Bhagavatam. It speaks about, or the Mahabharata, I should say. There's this great person is lying on a bed of arrows. He was killed at the battlefield of Kurukshetra, but he's not yet dead. And he stayed alive because he had great yogic powers. He stayed alive all the way until the time when the sun was moving towards the northern hemisphere. And then he left his body and he entered into the spiritual realm. So this is where the Bhagavad Gita is just before the war. And this scene that we're seeing here in this picture is right after the war. And Arjuna is one of the folks seated next to this person on the bed of arrows. His name is Bhishma. And Arjuna is there with Krishna. Krishna is also here, as you can see. He's got a peacock feather, and so we can recognize that's Krishna. And Bhishma looks at Krishna, absorbs his mind on Krishna in full devotion, glorifies Krishna and Arjuna and the rest of the brothers, and leaves his body at the opportune time. Now, that's how a yogi can leave their body, but then Krishna says in text 27, a devotee need not worry about any of these paths because bhakti is special. And in the last verse, he emphasizes, as he does in many chapters of the Gita, he concludes with the message of bhakti. He says that on the path of bhakti yoga, one gets the benefit of all other yoga paths. So you don't really have to worry about which time of the year or what auspicious event is happening to be able to leave your body. By performing bhakti yoga, you get all the benefit from studying the various scriptures, by performing sacrifices, doing pious activities, undergoing austerities, giving in charity. All of that, all of the benefit of doing these good activities is included in bhakti. Just like Prabhupada will give the example, if you have $1 million, your $10 or $100 problems are solved, right? You don't have to get a $10 bill or $100 bill separately. You have $1 million taken care of. Similarly, for one who is a practitioner of bhakti yoga, they get all the benefits of other yoga processes. That's how he concludes chapter 8. So here's a chapter at a glance. The first 4 verses are asking questions and answering those questions. And then the last question that Arjuna asks is, how to remember you, Krishna, at the time of death? And then the rest of the chapter is answering just that one question. On remembering Krishna, practicing that remembrance, the difference between the material world and spiritual world, and why we'd want to go to the spiritual world by practicing remembering Krishna, and then finally by pure devotional service, one's success is guaranteed. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. All right, so we have 5 minutes left. Is there any comments, questions, thoughts that you'd like to share, reflections, maybe your takeaways? If anyone has a takeaway, I'd appreciate hearing what you're taking away from today's discussion.
I have a quick question. Can you please explain who is Brahman?
Sure.
I didn't understand that.
So Brahma is what's called a demigod, meaning he's not God with a capital G, he's God with a small g. He is a empowered person. He's like you and me, a soul. He's a soul like you and me, but he's an empowered person to perform the act of creation. He's given the ingredients, he's given the plan, he's given the intelligence, and empowered to do creation. He is known as the creator. It's a post, not a person. Just like the president of the United States is a post. And at different terms of presidency, you're going to have different persons occupying the post. Similarly, Brahma is a post, and you have different souls occupying that post of Brahma every 311 trillion, 40 billion of our years. Makes sense. Maybe a little bit.
So you had mentioned Vishnu. Where
Yes.
is he at?
Vishnu is Krishna. Krishna is Vishnu. They're not different. Vishnu is another name for the Supreme, but it's more specific in that Vishnu is that feature of the Supreme that facilitates creation. So God is unlimited and God has many, many names. One of those names is Vishnu. And in fact, there are 3 different kinds of Vishnus, technicalities of which I won't get into because that will just make your head go round and round. Does that help?
Yes, but no.
Okay.
Are Brahman and Vishnu, are they in Krishna's abode?
No. Brahma is in the material world, in the topmost planet of the material world that takes care of creation. Vishnu is beyond the material world and brings the material world into existence. He facilitates the whole thing. And there's a form of Vishnu in each of our hearts known as Supersoul. And Vishnu is Krishna. Krishna in the office becomes Vishnu. Krishna at home is Krishna. God at home is Krishna. When God goes to the office and does his work with creation, then he's Vishnu, or a different, just a different name, the same person. I hope that helps.
Yes,
we can
yes.
we
thank
can
you.
talk more offline too if you like, and I'd be happy to type up answers.
Thank you.
Erica, you had something to say? I'm sorry.
Oh man, I forgot. That's okay. I totally forgot what I was gonna say. Sorry.
No worries. We'll come back to you. Anyone else would like to share a reflection, a comment, a takeaway that you have from today's discussion?
The thing like you were talking about the past life and its kind of impact on reincarnation. So I read a story about a guy in Texas who was working in city, got blind, and then some hypnotizer hypnotized him. And in that, things came out, and that guy started healing people all over US and even Europe and all that. So then another expert hypnotizer came and hypnotized him and tried to know that he doesn't have a medical degree or anything. How does he heal people? And in hypnotized state, he went into his past life and then said he was a priest in Egypt, from which he got whatever spiritual or special powers. And then in one of the birth, he was also a doctor. So it is combination of his past life, whatever experience or karma or impressions on his soul.
Fascinating, huh?
Yeah, I was shocked reading that story.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Mayank.
Yeah, thanks. Bro. And
Hare Krishna.
regarding
Sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mayank.
No. Please finish.
No, you. I did have my chance, so you please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to share that because I unfortunately I grasped the last 20 minutes of the presentation because I just got off work. But Prabhu, you mentioned that how this material world, not the world, the material world specifically, it's not meant for enjoyment, material enjoyment, but we always strive for material enjoyment. And it's amazing how we get dissatisfied, but we keep looking for that enjoyment in the material world. But at the same time, you can say that the nature of the soul is to enjoy.
Yes.
It's just maybe most of us, or even the ones that already been exposed to some kind of spiritual enjoyment, it's still, it still is very, it's not like it's hard to believe in that, but it's hard to implement and to accept that, this just like those weaknesses of the heart that Prabhupada talks about, it's just,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing in a negative way. It's almost like a mental concussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Bible says the what is it? The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, or something like that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, we
But
get
in
strength,
reality,
we can get strength from association, and when we get we get taste of the happiness of spiritual engagement and service to the Supreme. Then we try to build on that little bit of taste. We have a bunch of taste for material enjoyment, and it doesn't serve us very well. But then that little bit of taste we might have for spiritual enjoyment through loving service unto the Supreme, we try to build on that and build on that and build on that, and over time, by grace, we'll be able to look at material enjoyment, and even though it's tough, we say, no, that's not what I want. Like Neo in The Matrix. You saw Matrix, the movie?
oh yeah.
The end of The Matrix, Neo just stopped the bullet from coming to the illusion. It was just all illusion, and he knew it. But he was getting caught up in the illusion, and finally he just looked at that bullet coming his way, and he just put his hand up and said, no. And the bullet fell down. Yeah. Like that, the whole world that we live in and the happiness that it entices us with and says, enjoy, we can just say no. With the strength of association and the strength of genuine spiritual experience, of knowing that serving Krishna is my life and soul, and that's what gives me true happiness.
Because the pleasure is so strong, it's easy to make that decision, I guess, in one sense.
At some point, yes.
At some point, it's
initially it's like going uphill, and then at some point you're going downhill.
Nice. Can't wait to start going downhill. But
Yeah.
but and it's funny because even the pleasure of a material life, even though we're looking for it, I think to some degree we're convinced that we're not really going to get so much pleasure out of it, but we just keep, just like Prabhupada said, we're chewing the chewed over and over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I want to see if Erica, did you remember your comment yet?
No, but I got a different one.
Oh, okay.
I was just thinking, the connection to the Supreme, and I like to study, honestly, different religions. I love this one, but I'm always very interested to learn in the things that compare and contrast beyond religion. And I think that I was thinking to myself, because I always think when, their connection to God is ultimately what brings you to the Supreme and what brings you to the happy place we want to be. I always think, what if the people who are not conscious of Krishna, who are not conscious of God, if they're not thinking of Krishna in the time of death, what is going to happen to them? But in a way, I'm sort of relieved, because I have my own theory to that question, and that's, Krishna, God, that's everything, that's spirit, that's the world around us. It's in with all of our hearts, and as long as the person is connected to that, even if they're not completely aware of everything we're aware of, they can reach the Supreme as well. That was just my theory. I always think, what if the people who are not Krishna consciousness, if that's what we need to focus on, what about the people who don't even know about it? Yeah. But I think Krishna is not just necessarily Krishna, it's the Supreme.
Yeah, different facets to all kinds of facets. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we're at 9:37 p.m. Eastern time, a little over time, but I think we'll bring it to an end for today. If you have more questions or comments or takeaways, please put them in the WhatsApp chat. Happy to hear them, or I'm sure others would like to hear them as well. So I appreciate the time and that you all have invested to be part of this Sunday evening discussion. It takes a lot of effort and commitment to not do other things and be part of this. So I really appreciate that. It makes me, gives me a sense of joy and purpose.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yamar. You
Take
explain
care.
things so clearly and so kindly. It's greatly appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome.
So much.
Take care.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.